where these folks stand anyway. But of Hakeem Jeffries and of Greg Meeks, these neo-colonial black puppets of the Democratic Party, who supports a lot of what's going on. They're only upset now because he didn't come to them and ask them permission to do what they probably would have given them permission to do anyway. So talk a little bit about how neo-colonialism and how some of the black elected officials, because we always say black faces in high places doesn't mean black progress or black power.
Well, I'm not sure if I should dub Mr. Jeffries or Mr. Meeks with the descriptor APAC Shakur, for example, since both are in the pockets of the Zionist lobby. And how can I ignore, speaking of Brooklyn, Senator Chuck Schumer, for example?
Yeah.
I mean, this guy, not only is he interposing procedural objections with regard to this catastrophic war in Iran, that is to say, why didn't you consult us? And then we would have signed off on it, because as you know, he's in the pocket of Israel, and if Israel says jump, he says how high. And there needs to be a revolt minimally at the ballot box.
That's right.
We cannot go on like this. I mean, it's possible that this cowboy regime in Washington is setting us up for World War III. Now, it's very interesting to see how the New York Times and the Washington Post today dealt with the question of Russia, for example.
Right.
The New York Times took the position that Russia is letting its ally in Iran wither on the vine. In other words, it's trying to discredit Russia in the minds of the masses. The Washington Post says that Russia is sending intelligence to the Iranians, which is probably true, to help them to combat the US and Israel. In other words, they're trying to whip up hysteria against Russia. In other words, this regional war could easily tip into a world war. We also know that Israel has nuclear weapons. They're being backed against the wall. They're only bailed out during the Six-Day War of June 2025 because the Iranians probably made a strategic mistake when they accepted the idea of a ceasefire after the 12-day war was coming to a close. I don't think the Iranians will make the same mistake twice with regard to this conflict. And given the fact that the Israelis have nuclear weapons, that what's on the table in part is keeping Iran from getting nuclear weapons, do not be surprised if these lunatics in Israel decide to use the ultimate weapon. And once again, I should also say that this conflict should also remind us of the ideological weaknesses, particularly in the US left. Now, we're about to mark the 250th anniversary of this so-called republic on July 4th, 2026. But if you understand the true history of the United States of America, you would understand that the kind of negotiating tactics, so-called, that Washington has employed against Iran are similar to the tactics used against the indigenous population. That is to say, they would invite the indigenous leaders to a conference and then poison all the food and kill the people they were negotiating with. Or they'd invite them to a negotiating session, and once they arrive, they kill them all. But this is the sort of reality that many of our friends on the left have difficulty grappling with, which is why they tell us that somehow this was an incomplete revolution. I mean, that's like saying apartheid was an incomplete reform, insofar as it was intended to uplift the European working class so that they would not ally with the African majority, for example. And this should be as plain as the nose on your face, but apparently it's not. And these kinds of ideological weaknesses not only make it difficult for us to organize